Gardening doesn't have to be difficult. It never had to be. It can actually be quite simple and surprisingly easy, and it's all connected. And you can most definitely do it. Everyone can. If you have the desire, you can learn the skills. Anyone can learn the skills. It's something you can easily do. Yes, even you. Judd Lefebvre here with Green Thumb Gardening Secrets, where we're trying to reforge the generational chain of knowledge that connects people to their food and all the other wonderful joys of gardening. And it's not that hard, especially if you simplify it to what really matters. And what really matters is not a litany of disease and pest information. It's your plant's biggest needs for optimum growth, health, and productivity. That's where you start. It's the most important thing. Today, in late winter, while there's nothing up yet but cover crops, garlic, and hopes for the coming season, many people are considering starting their own gardens, making it a perfect time to show you how. To be their absolute best, vegetable garden plants actually need 6 things: immense amount of sunlight, super rich soil, moderate soil moisture, the correct air and soil temperature, proper spacing, and companion plants. If you give your plants these 6 things, they'll do exceptionally well. That's the whole secret to gardening. That's it. Really, that's it. Your first step in getting started with the actual task of gardening is to pick the right spot. And you want to pick a spot with the most direct sunlight you can, because our garden plants need it like we need food. Plants might do alchemy with carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients, but it's all powered by the sun. And the vast majority of our garden plants evolved in open, sunny environments, so are hardwired to require loads of direct sunlight. Plus, think of what we ask of them. We don't want tiny, tasteless tomatoes and paltry little broccoli heads. We want big, juicy, super flavorful everything. Therefore, our plants need a ton of sun to power all that size, sweetness, flavor, and nutrition. Think about it. Is there another plant in our landscape that can start from a seed and grow to the fruit the size of a tomato, an 8 or 9 inch ear filled with 100+ energy-packed kernels, or a huge squash in 4 months? Is there a plant that could do that in the shade, where flowers and seeds tend to be small just because the available energy is so much less? The sun powers all of that growth, and we want the best of it, so give it to them. Finally, the amount of direct sunlight a spot gets is often the hardest thing to change. You can fix soil that's low in nutrients, too dry, or even too wet. And you can easily change your planting times to change the temperatures in which your plants are growing. But there's usually nothing you can do to fix a spot that doesn't get enough direct sunlight. Doing so often means removing houses and large trees that give you shade and shelter and might not even be yours. So changing things that are theoretically not impossible, but functionally so. And choosing a spot that you eventually decide to abandon because it doesn't get enough sunlight means a lot of wasted work. So it's just much easier to start with a spot that gets enough direct sunlight right away. I show several ways to find out exactly how much sunlight a spot gets on my website. They're all really easy, and I've included a direct link to them in the description below. Keep in mind that to be anywhere near their best, most common garden plants need 9 or 10 or more hours of pure, unfiltered, absolutely direct sunlight. If you can't find a spot anywhere that gets 9 or 10 or more hours, there are a few things you can still grow in a spot that gets down to, say, 6 or 7 hours of direct sunlight a day. But I hesitate to tell you that because your plants won't be at their best, possibly without even you realizing it. And if you do notice it, you might think it's some mystical personal failing, like you magically just don't have the mythical green thumb, and then give up in defeat, when really it was just that you picked a spot that didn't get enough direct sunlight to fully power your plants. And I see this scenario all the time. But if you don't take my advice and you try to grow in too few hours of direct sunlight, keep in mind it takes much less energy to grow leaves like lettuce, spinach, kale, etc. than it does to grow flowers like broccoli and cauliflower heads, seeds like corn, or fruit like peppers, tomatoes, and eggplants. So plants that you grow for their leaves will do not their best, but okay in maybe 6 or 7-ish hours of direct sunlight a day. If you try growing anything from which you harvest flowers, seeds, or fruit, keep in mind that even when everything else is perfect, this is what broccoli heads look like when plants get only 7 hours of direct sunlight a day, compared to those right next to them in the exact same soil that got 9 or 10. If your best spot is currently covered with long grass, you'll have to kill it or remove the sod. You have 2 good options: cutting out the sod by hand and composting it, or smothering it well in advance. And 2 lesser options: tilling it in or smothering it closer to planting time. Each has its own pros and cons, all of which are too much to get into here, but you can find out more on all of them on my website. I'll leave a direct link to the pages on dealing with sod in the description below. For enriching your soil, you have 3 options: chemical fertilizers, organic fertilizers, or cured compost. To create super rich soil, you really only have one: adding cured compost. Chemical and organic fertilizers work, but only sort of. They'll provide richness to your soil, but their richness is short-lived, and they only provide the big 3 of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium without all the micronutrients that are also so critical for your plant's long-term health and yours. And once these pellets dissolve and are either taken up by plants, run off, or leach away, their richness is gone. It's sort of like a person eating only protein, carbohydrates, and fats, but not getting any of the vitamins and minerals that they need, but also doing so with carbohydrates that are all simple sugars and proteins and fats that go through their digestive system just as quickly. So they're hungry in an hour even if they've ingested more calories than they've used, but are somehow also malnourished. These things feed your plants, sort of, but they don't give your plants everything they need for long-term health. A well-balanced cured compost, in contrast, provides all of the macro and micronutrients plants need. It's the concentrated organic matter and complex organic compounds that feed the microbes and symbiotic mycorrhizal fungi that ultimately feed your plants in just the right proportions all growing season long. To use it, simply mix 6 inches of it into the top 6 to 12 inches of your soil, and your plants will love you for it. They'll also love the loosening of your soil that this mixing entails. There are several options here for mixing it in, from double digging it 2 feet deep, to spading or forking it in 1 foot deep, or even tilling it in 6 inches deep. But in general, the deeper you mix it and loosen your soil in the process, the better your plants will do. Personally, however, although it typically only take me 2 hours to complete a 3 by 10 foot area, I only do the much harder work of loosening and mixing compost 2 feet deep for plants with particularly large root systems, namely tomatoes, peppers, and the larger brassicas like broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage, for which I've found it makes the most obvious, profound difference. For the rest, I've made the personal decision that it's just too much work for the payoff. Therefore, I only recommend it, if at all, for just those parts of your plot that will hold those plants. And if that sounds like too much work, even for any part of your plot, luckily, loosening an area 1 foot deep with a digging fork and then using that same digging fork to mix in 6 inches of cured compost is the best mix of ease and efficacy, taking only about a half an hour to complete even a 3 by 10 foot plot, with great results for your plant's growth, health, and production. Similarly, although it's fallen out of favor a little of late, tilling a couple of times to loosen your soil, followed by tilling to mix in 6 inches of cured compost, is another easy option that gets very good, if not quite as great results. Additionally, if you weren't able to kill your sod in advance and don't want to remove it by hand, you can smother it with a layer of overlapped wetted newspapers 8 to 10 sheets thick, or a similar layer of overlapped cardboard, and then create a planting bed by placing 6 inches of cured compost directly on top of that. It's more of a short-term option and not the one I'd most recommend because it doesn't do any super beneficial mixing or loosening, and for the most part cuts your plants off from the natural benefits of the underlying soil, but it'll work okay. Some of your plants like lettuce will do just fine, but just keep in mind that 6 inches is way too shallow for many of your plant's root systems. And the layer used to kill the sod also keeps most of your plant's roots from penetrating it for the same reason it smothers the sod. Plus, this layer also isolates the soil in your planting bed from having its moisture regenerated from the natural upward wicking of water between soil particles, or capillary action, from the deeper water table, meaning it'll dry out faster and need to be watered more often, possibly much more. But if you have sod to kill, can or don't want to remove it by hand, and know to expect a little less in results your first year, so don't take it personally, but instead do some loosening and mixing the next year once your sod is gone, it's a fine way to get started in a pinch. Keeping your soil moderately moist can also be easy. In a mostly bare garden without a lot of organic matter, you need about 1 inch of water a week to keep the soil at the moderate moistness that most fruit and vegetable garden plants love, which is why it's the most commonly given advice for watering. In many regions, however, the rain will do this for you, especially early in the growing season. But if you don't artificially locate your bed soil high above the ground level, surrounded by warm wood, masonry, or metal on 4 extra sides, which dries it out much faster, don't functionally cut it off from the water table below that naturally feeds it through capillary action, have lots of organic matter in your soil like that provided by cured compost, which holds almost its weight in water, and mulch the exposed top of your soil in between your plants with straw, the soil will stay evenly, moderately moist with much less than 1 inch of water per week, leaving you not to have to water at all in many areas most times of the year unless it's a drought. If you're ever unsure if your soil is too dry, just stick your finger all the way into it and see how it feels. In areas where you're trying to get seeds to sprout and grow, try to keep it moist throughout until their little root systems get established. So until the plants are, say, 3 or more inches tall. Once your plants are more established, it's fine if it's dry on top, but moist starting, say, 1/2 inch or 1 inch down. If it's dry 1/2 inch to 1 inch or more down, likely water. It's not an exact science and depends a little bit on how established your plants are and what kind they are. Some like it a little wetter, some a little drier, but that should get you started. In terms of their preferred and in some cases required growing temperature, plants fall into two main groups: cool season plants and warm season plants. Because cool season plants can take a light frost, but get severely stressed and often bolt and go to seed when temperatures get over 80 to 85 degrees, so like 27 to 30 degrees Celsius. Each species can be planted a certain number of weeks before your specific local average last frost date to take advantage of the cooler weather but longer sunny days of spring that they love. Because warm season plants typically can't take a frost and love warmer temperatures, they're typically planted on or a certain number of weeks after your specific local average last frost date. You can use the number of weeks before or after your average last frost date that I have displayed on the screen here. You can look them up on my website. I also have a link to that specific page in the description below. Or you can use the seed packets, which typically display this information along with planting depth, spacing, etc. All will work well and be about the same. To find your specific local average last frost date in the spring, you can click on the average last frost date link in the description below that will take you to a page with resources to help you find yours. You can also just Google it. Every plant also needs its own specific amount of growing room, from 2 to 24 inches depending on the plant. Similar to how different people need different amounts of personal space. Your plants are basically just like goldfish, who stay small in a tiny fish bowl, but can grow quite large if given a larger, healthy space. Your plant's eventual size absolutely matches the space they are provided, staying small and even miniature in small and miniature containers, and only reaching their full potential if given their ideal amount of loose, rich, unoccupied soil to stretch their roots and search for nutrients. It's super important, therefore, to give them enough space. However, you also don't want a lot of extra empty space between them that just leads to sun-baked, dried out soil and more weed growth. The specific spacing I'm providing on the screen allows them to reach their full potential, but also be close enough to form a dense canopy of foliage to shade and cool the soil, preserving soil moisture and minimizing weed growth. You can also use the spacings listed on the seed packets. The only difference is that the seed packets often decrease in-row spacing a little, but increase between-row spacing a lot, because many seed companies assume most people are still stuck in the paths next to each row paradigm. Instead, our plants do best in beds we never walk on, planted in blocks, with their in-row and between-row spacing being roughly the same. I have much more on plant spacing and a method called offset spacing on my website. And you guessed it, link description below. Finally, every plant has preferences for which other plants grow near it. There are tons of reasons for this, like root depth and nutrient need compatibility, each taking up space and nutrients that the other is not, or deterring pests of each other with their scents. But the long and short of it is, they grow better, often markedly so, near their best companions. So we use it to our advantage. It can get complicated, however. Many a gardener has been left with their head spinning after trying to match all the best companion combinations for what they're planting. And you can go wild yourself. On my website under companions, I have one of, if not the most comprehensive compilation of all of them, all verified from at least 3 sources and most tested for many years, that is decades, in our own garden. To make it easier, however, here are 3 combinations of vegetable garden plants listed in order of what they do well next to. Note that since the sun will be slightly to the south, even in summer, taller plants like tomatoes typically go on the north side of a bed, so there's no garden plants in their casted shade. Groups listed here mean they're planted interspersed. For onions and carrots, spinach and onions,
lettuce, spinach, and kale.
This can be every other plant or every other row, whichever works best for you, but you can also do it however you want. I've certainly done it in patches or even little mini blocks. And for broccoli and kohlrabi, the kohlrabi in between the broccoli gets harvested way earlier so that the broccoli comes up and fills in the extra space. For tomatoes and onions, and tomatoes and carrots, both onions and carrots, and even a mix of the two, make a great companion border for tomatoes and fill in the extra spaces around a plant that, if viewed from above, would grow in a roughly circular area but is in a rectangular bed. For carrots and lettuce, each with early radishes, the radishes are often planted mixed right in with the carrots and lettuce seed, where they sprout strongly and help their slightly weaker companions break through the soil crust, and then are harvested earlier, leaving space for the lettuce and carrots to fill in. Finally, lettuce, spinach, and kale, and even onions and carrots with them, make a great set of companions, with kale continuing on all season and growing to fill in the space vacated by the earlier maturing lettuce and spinach, which are typically pulled when they start to bolt and go to seed during the first flush of hotter weather. As you can see in the third column, you can also use this combination strategically adjacent to the rows of carrots and onions surrounding a tomato plant, so you eventually end up with a row of large kale next to your tomato that is surrounded by carrots and onions. I would note, however, that such groupings often lead to other plants benefiting at the expense of onion bulb size. So while I add them as sort of sacrificial companions in groups like those listed here, for onions I want to reach ideal storage size, I plant them in their own separate block, ideally spaced apart. I'd also note that I really like the middle column's grouping of sweet potatoes next to broccoli and potatoes, followed by onions and bush beans the next respective spots away. Not only do they all grow great next to each other, but it also works great temporally, since the others are done growing and vacating their area of the bed just in time for the sweet potato vine vines to fill in the extra spaces they needed. So if you've always wanted to start but didn't know how, or if you've started but are wondering why you're struggling, these 6 very doable steps to give your plants exactly what they need should get you heading in an excellent direction that has you primed for long-term success. They'll make sure you give your plants everything they need to be their healthiest, most productive selves, and give you amazing vegetables every year without much trouble and without chemicals of any kind. You'll be the gardener you've always wanted to be, and be ready to always stay open to growing. You can find more on these topics and others on my website. I'll leave a link in the description below. Like this video if you liked it. Likes really help us out. Leave a question or comment below. I personally answer each one. And subscribe to get all of our future videos. And check out my channel for topics and videos I've already published. Just click on the green thumb gardening secrets or the channel icon below this video. And if social media is your jam, feel free to follow me on Twitter and Instagram for more green thumb gardening secrets, tricks, and tips. And just the tips.